Hence the name of the sermon, Do Virgin Groundhogs Light Candles? And it's all bound up in this messy morass of sociology and history and religion. And I'm telling you all this because just the way all those things get all messed up over history, spirituality is a messy life for all of us individually. Here we are, all of us grown-ups, able to put on our pants one leg at a time, those that wear pants. Most of us able to brush our teeth without too much help. I've reached the point where I have to shave with my glasses, but that's just nature having its way with me. We're capable human beings. And yet everything that happened to us when we were young still lies inside of us. That's why Wordsworth said, the child is father to the man. That where we were as children sets us on paths, makes choices, even before we know we're making them, that make us confident or cowering, make us bold or bashful, that make us loquacious or shy. The child was father to the man. Of course, he meant that kind of youthful eagerness that he liked. But Gerard Manley Hopkins captured the other part of it, that the mistakes we make as children, and we don't even know they're mistakes. We're just kids after all. Leave us with residuals. I'm going to ask you something. We all remember, I hope, being grown-ups and going to visit our parents when we're grown up. Is that not a bizarre feeling? When you walk into your old home where your mom and dad are, and you know you're grown up, you might be 30, 35, or 40, and yet the moment you walk into that house, this demon of small kidness comes up out of you. And your mom says something, and suddenly you're acting like you're 5 years old again. And what's worse, she's acting like she's the mother of a 5-year-old again. You see what I mean? Those things get inside of us, and they stay there. You can call them blessings or burdens. It doesn't matter. The child is father to the man. The child is father to the woman. Our early life becomes part of our adult life. And I'm really fond of a book that I haven't read for some years by Stephen Molinsky. It's called Trances People Live. Some of you may know it. He's a Buddhist and a psychotherapist. And he's convinced that most of us really aren't awake most of the time. That we are living in trances that are scripts. Like when you go home and you see your mom, and suddenly you're not looking at her as a person, she's your mom, so you're thinking like a child and you have the same old argument over again. That's a trance. You're not paying attention to what's happening in the moment. You're remembering everything that happened in the past. And of course, when you start treating your mother like a mother of a 5-year-old, how is she going to act? Like the mother of a 5-year-old. You see what I mean? We get into these patterns. And Walensky says that if we could just wake up from these trances, from these scripts, from these projected realities, we'd be really more adult. It is a life project, I think. Adult spiritual life in some ways is about disenthralling ourselves from our past, but not disconnecting ourselves from our past. Yes, we are who we are, but we are who we were. And not only inwardly, but outwardly. As we become more of an individual, we can now make choices we couldn't as children. We can choose who our friends are and our enemies. We can choose our mates for good and for ill. We can choose whether to have children, and if we're lucky, how many. Our duty to self suddenly becomes duty to others as well. And the whole challenge is neatly summarized by the wonderful first century Rabbi Hillel, who said, and I know I've repeated this before, if I am not for me, who will be for me? But if I am only for me, then what am I? And if not now, when? And that's not a series of questions that have a set answer. These are life questions. But where I want to go today in the few moments I have left is to call us back to that process of looking at our lives and stages, but also to see that this sermon is about that doorway we pass through from the spiritual challenges of youth and childhood into the spiritual challenges of adult life. Because, believe it or not, like it or not, that weird ritual I described of the flinging of the blood and the feasts of the purifications and the candles and the groundhogs, they were all fertility rites. not only for the earth, but for women and for men. Coming of age, we now think of as being ready to be an adult, but what we used to mean is ready to have children. And I want us to start looking with some honesty around sexuality as a spiritual enterprise, not just a biological enterprise. Long ago, sexuality was explicitly religious in all sorts of ways. Yes, the Torah has a lot of rules about who and who not should be connected to whom, but it also says that the having of one another is supposed to take place, and it's a meaningful process. You can go off to India and see temples covered with gods and goddesses who clearly enjoy the physicality of life, and I mean it from a sexual point of view. And remember, all those ascetic things, all those rules against doing things are all premised on the idea that sex is a great and powerful force in our lives. And if we don't deal with it, it will deal with us. What I'm trying to tell you is that spirituality is inseparable from sexuality because at some level, even in sexuality, we know that this is where life and death meet. Let me say that again. Sexuality is where we meet life and death at the same time. Any woman who gave birth before 1900 took her life in her hands, or did not even take it in her hands. Her life was at stake giving birth. Death could happen to any woman giving birth. Before the 20th century, more than 1 out of 5 childbirths ended in dead children or those that lived less than a week. We have lost the immediacy that sexuality is not only about life, but about death. And at a spiritual level, we need to know that we do not lose our innocence when we discover sex. It's when we lose our innocence when we realize death is real. It is really, really there. And that's something that only adults can do. To be an adult, whatever else it is to know that one has a life, that one can make a life, and that one will lose one's life. My late colleague Forrest Church said that these 2 facts are the origins of all religion, knowing that we are alive and that we will have to die. We come of age when we meet the reality not just of our minds but of our bodies, when we know that the fullness of life that surges through our limbs at youth will, in fact, dwindle and it will cease. And to know both of these things is to be an adult. 10,000 myths explain how this came to be and what it means. You can choose the one that you like. Virgins and groundhogs are but 2 of them. The one that touched me years ago and still touches me is a Polynesian myth. I ran into it by happenstance, in a time of deep personal struggle when my wife and I had lost our first child to stillbirth and were still asking deep questions about life and death for ourselves. That Polynesian myth runs something like this. The Creator spoke to the original pair of humans and offered them a choice. Would you prefer the death of the moon or the death of the banana? Puzzled by this choice, they asked what the difference was. And the Creator said, the moon dies and is reborn over and over again. The banana lives only once, but it creates new bananas. The answer was obvious. The couple said, we prefer the death of the banana, for the moon may live forever, but it is forever alone. But though the banana dies, it will never be lonely. Less than a year after our first was dead, I lay on a hospital bed with a newborn son, less than a day old, still bearing the crumple marks of the uterus. And I felt more alive than I had ever been and more frightened than I had ever known. Our old son was dead. Our new son was alive. The circle was complete. And I knew I was real, that he was real. And in the vastness of the universe, we were not alone. Amen.